Okay, U.S. history students, so here we are at the end of Unit 7, and it's time to do a lesson here where we just sort of try to step back and assess, evaluate, what do we think of Franklin Roosevelt here at the end of this? What do we think of the New Deal? This is truly a revolutionary period in American political history, and the way that Franklin Roosevelt transforms the office and transforms Americans' expectations and understanding of their government is profound. I want to take a step back and look at this and kind of weigh a few things out and then just help you prepare to formulate your own response of what do you make of this? What did you think of this, right? And so our targets here, I can assess FDR's political style and his legacy in response to his critics. So we're going to look at his style, the overall legacy piece. I can evaluate the proper role for government in American life. I mean, that'll be a big root of an essay that you'll write for your Unit 7 exam. And I can weigh the balance of biblical justice and political idolatry. That's something we've been working on a fair amount over the last month or two. I mean, speaking of revolutionary, let's just start right here. I want to start, again, there's so many ways that Franklin Roosevelt is a trailblazer. And for his fans, he's a trailblazer in ways that were heroic, and ways that were necessary. And for people who were maybe more inclined to be worried about him or to criticize him, he was a trailblazer in ways that were dangerous. So one example is, ever since George Washington, for American presidents at the end of their second term in office, they took the next exit ramp off and they said, okay, it's time for me to be done being president now and to make way for a new leader for the country in the spirit of republicanism and sharing powers between different factions and groups and people. And Franklin Roosevelt says, yeah, but what if I want to do a third term? What if I wanted to still be president? And no one's ever really enjoyed the job of being president seemingly more than Franklin Roosevelt had. And look, FDR argues we haven't finished. You can see this campaign ad. I want you, FDR, the country says, to stay and finish the job. Finish the job of restoring the American economy and repairing the damage done by the Great Depression, because that hadn't really been resolved. There's a rising war in Europe and Asia, and FDR says this war is bad news, Americans, and I've been the steady hand on the wheel, and please let me guide us because it looks like a storm is coming up, and we want a steady hand on the wheel through that. The Republican Party and a lot of Americans were like, I don't think it's good for us to keep going back to the well of the same guy, or I don't think it's good for us to have power steadily accruing to this one person over and over again. And look, despite the fact that there were some people worried, you can see FDR has this golden political touch, and we've talked about that a fair amount already. And he has, he's won the hearts and minds of the American public to such a broad degree that he's untouchable, all right? He wants a third term, he gets a third term. Guess what? In 4 more years, he's going to want a fourth term, and he's going to get a fourth term. I'll tell you about that in Unit 8. Now, that one's just a flat-out mistake for his health reasons. But I mean, the man was indomitable in so many ways, good and bad. I think it's fair to say this political cartoon here, which is playing on an old story of Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens, but it's we see FDR with his bowl and it says power, and he's like, more please. I think even his fans would say, yes, like what FDR did was he sort of created and accrued more power in the executive branch of government, the presidency, than had ever been had before. And what do I mean by that? I mean, he's creating new executive branches. He's creating new cabinet officials, new cabinet secretaries, new departments in the executive that answer to the president. They don't answer to Congress. They don't answer to the courts. They answer to the presidents. Also, FDR is saying because of this crisis of the Great Depression, because of this crisis of World War II, and that war is going to be raging right soon enough, or it actually was already raging by the 1939. He says because of that, I need to sort of act on an emergency basis. And so he's using these things called executive orders. And we'll talk more about executive orders later on, but they're kind of like thin laws, right? They're laws that can be issued quickly by a president, but they can also be rescinded very quickly by a future president. He's issuing more of these than ever before. People accused him of being power hungry. People accused him of distorting the balance of power in our constitutional system. And, his response to that was to smile and to laugh and to say, well, we got to beat this, we got to beat these calamities, these crises. He just, he would just had this thing where like criticism just bounced right off of him. He had this smile that was, it shone bright. In certain ways, a lot of people said you can't really access Franklin Roosevelt. You couldn't get to him. Nobody could really get to him. His family members said nobody really knows him. No one can truly get to him. He has this sort of weird defense mechanism where things just ding, they just bounce right off of him. And he just keeps going. He just can't be stopped. He just does not allow bad news to really slow him down. He just does not allow bad news to really sink him. And so for his followers, that optimism was inspiring and encouraging. For his critics, it was maddening and infuriating that they could not seemingly land a punch, and nor could they seem to kind of get him to really take them seriously. He just sort of proceeded on doing his thing. It was a kind of a funny quirk of his personality that was a part of his political momentum and his political ability. If we listen to here's a couple quotes here. These quotes are from people who are allies and friends of Franklin Roosevelt who are on the inside of all this as they talk about this growth of power. One person, his Treasury Secretary, so a very powerful person in the Roosevelt administration, said, in the past, the only business a citizen had with the government, meaning the federal government, the only business a regular citizen would have with the federal government was through the post office. No doubt he saw a soldier or a sailor now and then, but the government had nothing to do with the general public. After Roosevelt, the public felt that government was then an active part of everyday life. And more Americans are looking to the federal government as regarding what is the federal government going to do to assist me? What is the federal government going to do about people in my situation? What is the federal government going to do about this particular problem I'm facing? That is an eternal legacy of FDR and the New Deal. Another person, Raymond Moley, who is part of FDR's Brain Trust, which just means like a group of his top advisors, talking about the New Deal as a whole, said, to look upon these programs as the result of a unified plan was to believe that the accumulation of stuffed snakes, baseball pictures, school flags, old tennis shoes, carpenter's tools, geometry books, and chemistry sets in a boy's bedroom could have been put there by an interior decorator. So this guy's basically saying there was no plan. There was no unified, coherent vision. We're just trying all kinds of stuff. We're just doing all kinds of stuff. And in the end, it was fairly experimental, and it's a bit of a kind of a crazy mess, but it was popular enough, and it had some success, and it wasn't coherent in a certain way, but so what? That's really not the point. And so this is to sort of counter the idea that like there was a plan all along. There was no plan for Franklin Roosevelt. There was just optimism and momentum. Opponents of the New Deal. Like, what are critics saying? What do they have to say here with this? I'd say, the criticism of the New Deal grew throughout the 1930s, and the basic criticism was that the New Deal was just too much. It was too much meddling. It was too much tinkering, right? It was too expensive. This cartoon here, quite succinctly, I think it does a good job of telling the story of this criticism, right? So we see Uncle Sam here, the American public or the American economy, and it's looking a little unwell, a little addled, you could say, and it is loaded up with medicine, right? There's the AAA, the CCC, the NRA. You can see all the New Deal alphabet soup there. So Uncle Sam is like loaded up with medicine, and we see FDR here with more New Deal remedies, and he's saying, of course, we may have to change remedies if we don't get results, right? We might have to try some new medicine. We might have to try this and try that. And critics of the New Deal are just saying, stop giving the economy more medicine. Like the medicine is what's screwing it up at this point. Let the economy adjust itself. let it work itself out at this point, but you constantly tinkering, changing rules, adding more incentives in here, removing some incentives there, telling farmers not to produce here, putting other farmers to work doing this stuff there. It's like at some point, the economy doesn't know what to do with itself, right? You've kind of fouled up all the internal mechanisms, and it's like you're just getting haywire results. Just take your hands off it for a second and let it start to work itself out, right? And like this micromanaging of businesses is really not what it's going to take to sort of work our way out here. I mean, the basic criticism is this. The criticism was that the New Deal took a economic crisis, right, of the Great Depression, and instead of fixing it, it just prolonged the thing. Rather than the economy sort of hitting this sort of natural, valley and then being able to work its way out, it sort of hit this valley, and then they kept screwing with it and like adding more medicine and tinkering with it, and like the recovery just took much longer than it should have. That's what this criticism is. Or other people just said, look, I mean, it's paper thin what's going on here. FDR is using the New Deal thing of like, we got to beat the Great Depression. That's his language. And then he does stuff like the TVA, which is just like, so let me give some giveaways to Southern farmers, who, by the way, are key voting constituents of mine. Like, this is like, he's just using these programs to give giveaways to his voters, right? That's what some people said. And FDR's response to all of this was like, nah, just like, that's not what we're doing. Let's just keep trying more stuff. Because FDR was convinced that if he told the public, well, I feel your pain, I'm confident we're going to beat it, and we're going to try some more stuff, that the public would just come along with him. And, there was a sense that he just said the people who are kind of nitpicking around this are saying that what businesses need is less management and they need more freedom to operate. He just felt confident that the public wasn't going to buy that particular criticism. Now we have to look at this. I mean, we do have to kind of recognize there's one question when it comes to thinking about the New Deal, all right? And the one question you have to begin with is, did the New Deal do its job? And the job of the New Deal is to end the Great Depression. So did the New Deal end the Great Depression? And there, it's very clear. The answer is no. The New Deal did not bring an end to the Great Depression. This isn't a controversial thing to say. Everyone can see it. The numbers are plain. So if we look here, this bar graph is unemployment. The higher that unemployment, the worse it is. You don't want that. Right now in our country, we have unemployment at 3-something%, right? It's quite strong actually at the moment. So like this is where we are roughly right now. You want it somewhere around 5% or lower. So when we start off and unemployment is crazy sky high, that's really bad. The New Deal starts, things seem to get stimulated, right? The economy is stimulated, but at no point during the years of the New Deal, did unemployment fall below 20%. Like it never got to even a halfway healthy place. All right. So if the job of the New Deal is to bring an end to the Great Depression, it was not able to bring an end to the Great Depression. And a lot of you are looking at this saying, well, what did bring an end to the Great Depression? And I see U.S. creates a war economy. U.S. enters World War II. Weirdly, World War II is what will bring an end to the Great Depression. And I'll explain it all in the next unit. And, so people say, hey, you were supposed to solve the Great Depression with this New Deal, and it's not doing it. And people said, and in the process, you're spending just an unprecedented amount of money. Government has never spent this much money before, right? And again, to that FDR, he was sort of unfazed. As he said, hell, a balanced budget isn't putting people to work. I will balance the budget as soon as I take care of the unemployed, all right? All right, why don't you go to the public and you can complain about how we're spending too much money and the budget isn't balanced. And I'll say, I'm trying to help unemployed people, and we'll see which party wins, right? And look, you saw in that election in 1940, it's not close. FDR recognizes I've got a political recipe that I can win with. And so, no, I'm not going to balance the budget. We're going to keep going, whether it's truly working or not. So you might say, well, then it was a failure, right? And I'd say, well, it's more complicated than that. Of course, I want us to lean into nuance and complexity. There were positive benefits of the New Deal, for sure. Let's start with the banking system, right? FDIC, the bank holiday and FDIC permanently seems to repair and restore the banking system in the United States. We don't have, bank runs have become a thing of the past, right? When a bank run happens in the movie It's a Wonderful Life or Mary Poppins, you have to explain, people are like, what is happening here? Like, it just doesn't happen nowadays, right? It used to be a thing people feared. It is no longer present, thanks to those New Deal programs. Pockets of rural America, like in the Tennessee Valley, right, get modernized, get helped along. And you can say it was economically inefficient, but FDR says, well, it benefits a vulnerable and needy part of the population. So, sorry, not sorry. That's what we want to do. I think for a lot of Americans, I list farmers or the elderly, people with disabilities, widows. It said the federal government is your ally. The federal government will sort of stand behind you in a crisis. The federal government will support you, right, through programs like any of these New Deal programs, but Social Security more than any, right? More than any, Social Security was this sort of signal to Americans that for the vulnerable, which would be like the elderly, widows, disabled, the federal government will stand behind you, all right, and will support you. And Social Security is kind of, in a certain way, it's the granddaddy of all kind of benefit programs or welfare programs in the United States of America, and it is by far the most popular, in part because it seemed to change the story of what the government's role is in American life in ways that resonated with Americans. I think also one thing you have to say is the New Deal arrived at a time when there was a whole lot of people who were willing to listen to crazy radicals who said the time for socialism has come, or the time for anarchism has come, or the time for fascism has come. We've hit the dead end of capitalism and democracy, and we have to turn to these sort of crazy radical philosophies. And the New Deal is an adjustment of capitalism for sure. It ain't the old capitalism anymore. But Franklin Roosevelt argued, I saved capitalism. Like, these programs saved capitalism because it was about to run aground, right? And if we hadn't done this, capitalism, and who knows, maybe democracy would have run aground in the United States the way it did in some places like Germany. Now, it's kind of a non-provable, non-falsifiable thing, but it resonates with how that moment in history was working in some parts of the world. At the same time, I'll give the last word to this cultural commentator, George Will, who's a political scientist. He said, 11 of the Constitution's first 12 amendments added more restrictions to the federal government than those written into the document in Philadelphia in 1787. 6 of the next 7 amendments, however, enlarged federal powers. So after the initial founding, a lot of the amendments have been about expanding federal powers. Still, from the founding until the 1930s, the American premise was itself a formidable inhibition of the central government. That premise was that the function of government is to provide the conditions, ordered liberty, in which happiness can be pursued, but not to provide happiness itself. Since the New Deal, the government has become steadily more ambitious. Americans have not, however, become more content with their government. So the government stepping in saying, let's do more to help you pursue happiness, let's do more to help you be happy, has not necessarily resulted in a happier populace. Guys, we're going to leave you with that. Good luck as you prepare and study for the Unit 7 exam. Thank you for your awesome work today. We'll talk soon.